that's all done. And now you're building the really fun stuff. And that's where, like, you don't want to stop for lunch. You don't want to put your tools down for nothing. You're just excited about the build. And I'll tell you what, after myself, 25 years of doing this, Mike and Jim, 31 plus years of doing this, there isn't a day where I wake up and don't want to get down here as soon as I possibly can. It's just.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Ryan Fielding, Fab Shop Manager at Ring Brothers in the United States. Ring Brothers is probably one of the premier custom car builders anywhere in the world, and I've had the pleasure of drooling over some of their creations just about every time I go to SEMA. They've managed to really take classic American muscle cars and modify them in a way where, to the untrained eye, they might not seem outwardly heavily modified, but it's the attention to detail and the way these cars are modified to really enhance the features of the original car while still making them absolute standout and one of a kind. The attention to detail just has to be seen to be believed. In this interview, we find out how Ryan got his start in fabrication and learned all of the skills that he's applying these days on these high-end Ring Brothers builds. We also find out in his experience what separates the average automotive fabricator from people like himself working at the absolute top of their game. Ring Brothers has been around for some 30 plus years, and obviously over that time, the cars as well as the technology have evolved. So we also dive into some of the technology that Ring Brothers are now incorporating in their builds, such as 3D modeling and 3D scanning. In some instances, building the car entirely in CAD before the first piece of metal is ever cut or welded. Interestingly though, that's not the best approach for every single build, and we find out from Ryan's perspective why some lend themselves to CAD modeling and design and why others don't. We also talk about some of the other technologies such as composites that Ring Brothers are now incorporating in their builds and how they decide what technology is right for what jobs. Lastly, we also find out how they work with other high-end suppliers that work in the industry and how they decide to work with others that are at the top of their game rather than bringing that particular task in-house. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools or just about anything in between. They are great prizes and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Ryan. Thanks for joining us today. And as we always do, let's start by digging into your background. How did you become interested in cars in the first place?
So I tell you what, Andre, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be talking with you and your guests. And to get into that, it's a long, complicated answer. I'll try to keep it as short as I can. So I'm third generation messing around with cars and fabrication and welding and building stuff out of metal. My grandfather actually was part of a traveling stunt troupe called Jimmy Lynch and the Death Dodgers. And this was back in the 40s. So pre-World War II and post-World War II, he was with this troop, and they did state fairs and carnivals and county fairs all around the country, and jump over cars and do all sorts of up on two wheels tricks and this sort of thing. And at the end of the day, they broke a lot of stuff, obviously, and they had to fix it, and they had to come up with ways to make these vehicles lighter and faster to do all these tricks. So that's where he got his foundation, and then he settled down and started his own shop. Had a son, which is my father, and my dad grew up in his shop, right, watching my grandfather build all these crazy creations, and he got into some circle track racing and building go-karts and sprint car chassis and all sorts of craziness. And then just hot rod stuff, right? He would get wrecked cars and fix them up, or build these crazy hot rods. And Dad grew up, in his shop, kind of watching what he was doing, and then got put to work, as soon as he was able to, run a torch or get a wrench, he was put to work. The same story kind of got told for myself. So growing up, in my father's shop, he built hot rods and motorcycles and all sorts of crazy creations, taking cars and putting them on top of Blazer chassis and with big mud tires and, all sorts of fenderless hot rods. And
so cars and fabrication was sort of ran in the blood. You really had no option.
Yeah, I grew up in his garage, and, I got a welder put in my hand at, I think, probably about 8 years old. And it was a stick welder back then. And, it was, if I broke my go-kart, well, I had to fix it. And that's kind of how it started. And it's been a lifelong passion ever since.
I think a lot of that sort of necessity is one of the best ways of learning something. If you've got no option but to fix something, well, you're pretty quickly going to figure it out. Hey, it's probably not going to be pretty to start with, but you'll get there. Then it becomes repetition.
Right.
All right, so in terms of getting from that point in your life to where you are now, is there sort of any formal education or qualifications around fabrication, or essentially is this sort of all been handed down from granddad and your father?
Right. So, real fortunate to work with some pretty amazing people and to have that handed down. I did go to college, tried to go the engineering route, which I did. And the idea was to keep the car building on the side as a hobby and let that passion grow. And it didn't take real long to realize that, that passion was going to be my life, and it wasn't going to be just a hobby. So right, even in college, I knew that this was the route I was going to go. Finished out that engineering degree because that's important skill when you're building anything. But then right back into building cars and motorcycles there right after college.
Okay. So mechanical engineering degree, I'm assuming there?
Right.
Okay, interesting. Do you think that makes you sort of a more complete fabricator, having the fabrication knowledge, and obviously there's a lot of sort of artistic flair, I guess, I think that comes with high-end fabricators like yourself. You're not just sticking boxes together. It goes so much further than that. But then the flip side of this, I think, is it'd be really easy to design and fabricate something that probably doesn't stand up to sort of engineering best principles. And obviously when we're talking about some of the aspects of a car, such as suspension, anything mission critical, that can end up being incredibly dangerous. So do you think those two sort of parts of your world coming together make you better at what you do?
Absolutely. Any education you can have, as it relates to honestly to any subject, but specifically as it relates to anything in construction or mechanics, is going to help you be a more rounded fabricator or car builder, right? So you just look at things a little bit differently, and something that you might not necessarily take into consideration otherwise, having looked at say the mechanics of a cantilever system, you understand a little bit differently the stress points and where weaknesses might occur, and it just forces you to look at things differently. You might not always have the answer, but it forces you to ask the question, and then you can look into it further and research that. And I think it absolutely does affect everything I do on a day-to-day, because it just helps you look at things slightly different than somebody else might.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the fabrication industry in the performance automotive market, there's obviously thousands of fabricators all around the world. I've dealt with my fair share of them, and I've sadly found that there are more average or subpar fabricators than there are good ones. And then we've got the likes of yourself. I'd say there's a very limited number of people around the world operating at your level. So I'm interested on your take of sort of what separates the very high achievers like yourself from the average fabricators. What's the difference? What's the secret sauce?
First of all, thank you so much for the compliment. You're too kind. But I tell you what it always boils down to is opportunity and drive. First, you have to have the ambition and the passion to devote yourself to your craft. And then after that, you need the opportunity to showcase those skills. And we're so blessed here at Ring Brothers to have some amazing clients and customers that really let us showcase those talents. Everybody here at the shop, is extremely talented, and it's really comes down to having the ability and the time allotted to really showcase those talents. And that's something that we've been real fortunate with. So I think that's really it. It's that creativity and that talent lies in all fabricators, and it's a matter of really being able to apply the time and to really let their creative juices and their passion flow and not be restricted, really, and just let it out. And I think that makes a big difference, right? If you're kind of put into a time frame box, or you're capped on your creativity, it's going to kind of stall out there. But if time again you're able to push yourself and push those limits of what you can do after 20, 30 years of doing this. Ring Brothers has been around for 31 years now. You get 3 decades under your belt of doing this kind of stuff, and you pick up a few things.
Yeah, definitely.
You're able to use what you learned on the last build on the next one and the next one and the next one. And hopefully, by the end of it, you're able to put all those things together and really be proud of everything that you're doing. And we are.
I think one of the terms you just used, I want to dig into a little bit further, though, is the term creativity. And for me, and I'm not in your world, but for me, I think that's actually one of the key things I see as a differentiator between average and excellent fabricators, and I have worked with both. Now, for me, earlier in my career as an enthusiast, I had to do everything. So I can MIG weld, I can TIG weld. I don't enjoy it. I wouldn't say I was very good at it, but when needs must, I can stick 2 pieces of metal together. But the difference is I don't believe I ever had that creative side to sort of be able to sit at the start of a project and visualize, what it's going to be and what it could be, where the freedoms are. And I think that creativity, that's where people like yourselves really shine. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I think that on top of everything else you just mentioned, I just wanted to dive back into that creativity part a little bit further.
I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, for me personally, the creativity is what drives me. That's really what fuels my passion, is being able to look at a problem, look at a part, look at a blank space on the car, knowing that something needs to go there. Let's say it's a engine support brace or an interior component, or the way that the taillight panel is going to look, and to be able to sit back and visualize it, sketch it out, talk about it with the other guys, and then to be able to take a piece of metal and then make that thing that you thought of, right? That is, I think, what inspires all of us fabricators, right? Is to have an idea and then be able to bring that idea to fruition with raw materials in your hands, right? And obviously some tools involved, but to be able to go from thought to end product is really a special feeling, and the feeling of accomplishment when you stand back after you've made it and you're excited about it and it works. That's really a special feeling that just can't be beat.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Sort of in that same vein, being in the industry as long as you have, being involved in so many really special builds, what is it that sort of keeps you passionate, keeps you driven, and keeps you turning out to work the next day?
Well, I tell you what, not one of the thing that really drives me is the fact that we have a team of people here at Ring Brothers that constantly pushes everyone around them, right? So we are all excited about the next thing that we're doing and utilizing new technologies, and not being content with any sort of plateau or status quo as far as the builds are concerned. A prime example, that truck we did a couple years ago, Enyo, that 48 Chevy Loadmaster, that thing was the wildest thing we had done up until that point. And we used every bit of technique and talent and materials, and utilized other people and outsourcing and our friends in the industry to really put together something that we were just it pushed all of us beyond our known limits. And now 2 years later, we're doing a vehicle that pushes beyond that by sixfold, right? Tenfold. It's crazy. And that is, I think, what drives all of us, right? That it's exciting and it's new, and we're constantly pushing the envelope of what we think is we were capable of doing, number one. And then trying to utilize the new technologies that are becoming available to us, between being able to 3D print in metal, and the prototyping with the traditional 3D printing, and the carbon fiber work that we're able to do now, and the things we're able to design. It's just really incredible. Not to mention the partnerships we have with some of these great designers and people that are focused in their particular field. We're all able to just keep pushing those limits. It's funny when we talk to either our upholsterer or our carbon fiber guys. We come up with these ideas, and you kind of get this reaction of like, boy, yeah, like, and that's the reaction that I think we all want, right? Because it's a challenge.
Yeah, you're pushing someone out of their comfort zone when you get that sort of a reply.
Yeah, right. And at the end of it, it's always come around of like everybody's all smiles when you get it and you figure it out. And that really, I think, is what makes all of us want to get here as soon as we wake up in the morning, because that drive to bring that thing to life that we've been talking about, that we didn't know if was going to be possible, how we were going to do it, if we're going to be able to do it within the time frame that we gave ourselves. All of those things are something that really, really pushes all of us.
Yeah. I think it's pretty special that this far on each build you can still progress and push further into doing things that previously seemed impossible. In the same way you talk about these sort of new technologies and the builds keeping you excited. I mean, I think I bring that back to what I do, and I'm much the same. I'm really deep in the EFI tuning world. There's always new technologies coming out. There's new ECUs, new engines, new features. So, there's never a dull day. It'd be very rare I don't jump on the dyno and learn something new. So for me, I'm always able to progress. And I think at the point I sort of go stagnant, I'm going to definitely lose interest and passion in what I'm doing.
Right.
All right, we've talked a little bit about Ring Brothers. I'll jump a bit out of my order that I'd planned, but that's just fine. So, let's talk for those who haven't heard of the name Ring Brothers, and I'm assuming most have. But give us sort of the history. So you've already mentioned, was it 31 years in business?
31 years, yeah, yep. So the Ring Brothers, that's Mike and Jim Ring. They are brothers. Their last name is Ring, so they are the Ring Brothers. And the way that started years ago is, before it was even the name of the shop, is they'd show up at a car show, and so somebody'd be like, "Oh, there's those Ring Brothers."
It stuck.
Yeah, it stuck, right? And it's great. So that was that was 31 years ago, and those guys, since they were teenagers, much like myself, right? We've been messing with cars since we were kids. We're all country kids. We're out here in southwestern Wisconsin, which is in the Midwest part of the United States, and small town. The town that we live in is 1,800 people or something like that. And we all grew up just messing around with cars and go-karts and building stuff to go faster. And that just all kind of took us through to where we are today. But so they started the company, and they've built it up to what it is today. We've got just under 30 employees. We've got a full line of parts manufacturing. So we have a full product line of production parts, where we've got a full machine shop that's going 5 days a week, 2.5 shifts, cranking out some really awesome billet components, hood hinges and door handles and mirrors and carbon fiber components, and we constantly try to develop new components, new parts, and make those available to the public. So one of the things that's real important to us when we do these builds, these SEMA level builds, is on a vehicle that we haven't done before, we'll develop parts out of necessity for that build, and then hopefully bring them to market, right, for people to use on their own builds. So that's the way that it goes a lot of times. Last year at SEMA, we debuted two cars that we hadn't built before. One was a 70 CUDA and the other was an 87 Grand National. So with both of those, we constructed parts for those builds that we then brought into production. So you're able to get through the Ring Brothers site now. And, if you have a G-body or you have a CUDA, there's parts available that previously weren't through Ring Brothers. And that's something that we try to do with every build is, develop these new products. And
Do you think obviously there's a limited number of customers that can afford a full high-end build, and we'll talk about some of the numbers later as we get going. Do you think these product lines that you're offering, obviously it fixes a problem in the first place, but is that a way of someone that doesn't have budget for $1 million+ build to sort of have a little bit of Ring Brothers on their car, feel like they're involved?
absolutely. No, and I tell you what, it's real exciting when we're at a show, if it's a good guy show, or it's a Triple Crown down in Nashville, or even, at SEMA, and you walk around and a car kind of strikes you, and you realize, oh, whoa, that's our mirrors and our door handles and our hinges. And, that's really special to see, and to see how they're utilized, right? Because it's with any of these, especially if you're getting them in raw aluminum, you can paint it, you can powder coat, anodize. People do all sorts of stuff with them, and it's really neat to see what people do with those on any level of build. But you're exactly right. We get people that will stop in, and they've got their garage built, say, 69 Camaro or their Tri-5 Chevy or something, and they've got our door handles and hood hinges and trunk hinges, and they're really excited about that. Not only just because they're a superior product to what the OE came out with back, as the original equipment, but, the fact that they have what we use on some of these higher end builds, I think, is exciting for people. And it's exciting for us to see, folks using them on their builds. That's why we come up with these things, right? We try to make a better part and make it, something that's going to last the lifetime of this vehicle.
Yep. You, just to jump back, you mentioned there's 30 staff. So could you give me maybe not each of their roles, but kind of how does that break down in terms of, fabrication versus, I don't know, workshop management, sales, parts?
Yeah. So we've got the largest grouping is going to be in the machine shop, with the machinists, and so in that building, and we're set up on our campus with actually physical separate buildings, and that works out nice because then you're keeping the body shop dust away from the machine shop, and they're physically separate buildings. But the machine shop's going to carry the most, where we've got shipping and receiving and our sales staff, and then the machinists and our engineers that are working on new product development, and they're also the ones that will do our 3D printing for us and that sort of thing, and run the machining on our higher end builds. So like we've got a 5-axis machine where they're making some of these critical parts for these higher end builds. But a bulk of the grouping is in that machine shop. And then in the fabrication shop, we've got myself and 4 fabricators. So there's 5 of us total in there that are strictly in that role in fabrication. And then the body shop, we've got about the same. But then again, with the bodywork being done on our builds, we also, believe it or not, and this always kind of trips people out, is that we run a full collision shop as part of the company. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, if you came in on any day, there's going to be a SEMA car being worked on right next to a pickup truck that backed into the mailbox or something. But and I tell you what, it's important because it helps us keep a finger on the pulse of what the factory is doing. And so many times we'll pull something apart, and one of the guys in the body shop will bring it over and be like, "Hey, check this window regulator out," or this door hinge, it's small and it's got a lock built into it, or whatever. These neat things that you don't know exist until you get one of these things tore apart. So we really use it a lot for R&D.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it comes up, or even a door seal or a window seal. We'll look at something that you wouldn't have thought to look at, say a 2018 Toyota Camry, and you look at the trunk seal and you're like, oh man, we could use that on this build because it's small and it seals differently than you're used to seeing or something. And then we've got our front office, and then our assembly building. So we've got kind of spread out throughout those different departments, are our staff. But again, in the machine shop, that's where we've got the most employees on a daily basis.
Okay. So 31 years in business, that obviously has seen a fairly large range of cars come out of Ring Brothers. What point would you sort of say Ring Brothers really rose to notoriety and sort of became one of the top dogs in the custom car scene?
Well, that was before my time here with the company, but I feel like right away, they hit the ground running. They did a yellow Camaro that made the cover of some magazines, and that was pretty early on. And I think after that, every car that was built kind of exceeded the one previous, and it drew a different clientele and a new clientele, and then that one was seen, and so on until it brought us to where we are now.
So they've basically always been hitting it out of the park.
Right. I really, to be as modest as possible, I really think that's the case. They had a unique perspective on what this industry looks like, what a resto-mod should be. I find it interesting always, even still today, with as many as, and you've been to SEMA and seen the vast number of cars that we have out there in this industry. And one of the things that I hear consistently is that somebody will say, I came around the corner and I saw that car and I knew it was a Ring Brothers car before I even got up close to it, right? And there's just that certain something.
There's a family resemblance. You've got a certain style that runs across all the builds.
Right. And that's a testament to Mike and Jim and what they started with. And you can see that in the first builds. And of course they'll kind of chuckle and say, boy, I wish I could have some of those back. And we all do, right? But you can see that family resemblance, like you say, in all of those. And it's just been a wonderful ride to be able to use technology as that it has increased in just in what capabilities are, and then with the clientele that we've been able to reach and been so fortunate to work with, that allows us, frankly, the time and the budget to build some of these cars.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these aren't small budget builds, and I guess it's almost, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You need the client with the money to build a car, but you also really need to have a built car to show the quality of your workmanship to attract the clientele with that sort of money. However, obviously, at some point in time, they cracked that formula, and here we are. Just one thing you were talking about there is sort of every build was sort of bigger, better, more advanced than the last. Does that kind of philosophy almost end up building you into a corner, whereas every project that comes through the door, you're trying to figure out how to one up the last thing you did?
Right. So and it's interesting that you say that, and we've talked about that before with, let's say, a Mustang or Camaro. We've of course built many of each, and there's a point with any of these where you don't want to be doing something just for the sake of doing it, right? There's certain things that just plain look good. And if we can use what we learned on the last one and refine it a bit on the next one, all the better. And that's what we try to do. But also, what's really inspiring to everybody here and what excites us is building something new. And if you're building a vehicle that you haven't built before, then you can throw every idea you have at it and not feel like you're stepping on the toes of the last one.
Must be quite tricky if you're doing a car that you've built several of, to do exactly what you're saying there, not sort of steal design cues off the last one you built. But also, I mean, if you've done, let's say, by the time you've done 10 of a particular car, maybe a Mustang, well, okay, now at what point, how do you actually differentiate this? What are you going to do to make it special or different?
Right. And that's where, a lot of times it's real exciting to come up with those kind of, new ideas. And at the same time, there are things that just plain look good, and you don't want to mess with that just for the sake of making it different, right?
Yeah. Obviously, you're well known for the big dollar builds that you should get showcased at the likes of SEMA and other shows at that level. How important are those to getting Ring Brothers to where you've got to today?
Yeah, it's incredibly important, because just the visibility that those kind of builds have, brand recognition, and the fact that you pop on some video games and see a Ring Brothers car, or there's so many different avenues where that kind of audience is available to us, and that comes from from these higher end builds and having the eye of the public when you're at SEMA or Triple Crown, or we have a show coming up here this fall out west in California that's going to be really important to us. And it's important to be out there and to be visible and to let people see up close and personal what it is that we're doing, what these builds look like. And honestly, it's really important as well to help showcase our partners that we work with on all these builds, to show what they're doing and what they're capable of. Like we work with HRE, we have HRE wheels on just about every build we do. And it's exciting to be able to let them showcase a new product, on one of our vehicles. And that goes right down the line with with so many of the the great companies that we work with, and that's at shows like SEMA and the like, to have that presence and to really let people see what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of the big builds sort of don't really get the publicity. Maybe it's just a guy who wants a super cool car, comes to you, goes through the build process, and then probably it gets locked away and doesn't get seen by that many of the public. So that's not that helpful in terms of building up your brand. I want to talk about the kind of the typical build process, and I suppose typical is a tough word to use there. They're all going to be dramatically different. It's probably important just for the listeners to talk about you've got a range of builds from the big SEMA builds, which are probably a long build process, through to, I'm guessing, just simpler modifications to cars as well. It's not all these high-end SEMA builds, correct?
Right. So, our focus, what you see, of course, what you see in the magazines, what you see at SEMA are the other higher end builds. But yeah, absolutely. There's of course room for those middle ground builds, and it's tough, and it's difficult to narrow those down because it's so varied, right? From, a slight modification on a vehicle that's otherwise mostly complete to, doing a more traditional restoration with, slight modifications, maybe a drivetrain swap, a chassis swap. A prime example of that right now, one that we've got going, is a 62 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud Cabriolet, so two-door convertible. And that one, roadster shop chassis, modern drivetrain, but we're going to retain the original interior and make some, modifications, of course, modern column and electronics and gauges and all of that. But it's not a full-on.
Yeah, not a SEMA build. So this sort of comes back to the term you used earlier, resto-mod, term I quite like. So basically, the idea that I have for that in my mind is externally it's going to look mostly like the original car. Maybe lowered, cool wheels, whatever. Maybe some modifications to the bodywork, but generally someone's going to look at it and understand what it was. But then you've got a modern chassis with modern suspension, kinematics, modern brakes, probably a more powerful engine. So something that's going to drive like a more modern car with more power, but still look like the original car. Well, I kind of got that right.
Right. Exactly. And that's the key, like, and prime example with this Rolls Royce that we're doing, right? Like, the idea being that you can hop in, it looks like a Rolls Royce from all angles, but you turn the key and it's no different than turning the key on a brand new Cadillac. It's going to start every time. All your modern electronic, obviously management system for fuel and the engine management system, it's all either factory computer or like a Holly Dominator or Terminator, depending on the vehicle that we're running. But it's the idea that, yes, it looks old, but it handles brand new, and that's what we generally are shooting for with these. Obviously performance and style, but also we want it to function well and to be reliable and to be a real pleasure to drive, not one where you walk out there going, boy, I hope it starts.
It's like that sometimes.
Right.
We're if we ever find time or some more staff, we're basically going down that same path. We've got a 66 Chev C10, stock 350 Chev carburetor. It's nothing flash, probably makes 150 horsepower if it's going downhill with wind behind it. And as we bought it, it was sitting very, very low static ride height, no airbags or anything like that. And we thought, oh, this is cool. The look of it was exactly what we wanted. It's a patina paint job. It's definitely not tidy. You can chuck the dogs in the tray, and if it gets scratched, it doesn't really matter. But we wanted it to drive like a modern truck. So we've currently got a Roadster Shop chassis sitting in our yard in a crate, but we've just had no manpower to actually do anything more with it. Interestingly, on that note, both my business partner and I drive this C10 pretty regularly, and I've kind of got used to all of its little quirks and foibles now, and it's a pretty good thing. The only thing I'd really like is power steering, which obviously the Roadster Shop chassis fixes. Having said that, the long-term aim is an LS swap probably at some point with a couple of turbos. And I think if that thing had 800 to 1,000 wheel horsepower as it is, you'd be dead pretty quickly. It does not handle, and it does not
Yeah,
stop.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, there's reasons to fix all of that. Okay, I've gone a little bit off tangent here, but let's come back. So we've talked about sort of the range of builds you do, but obviously the SEMA level builds are the ones we're most interested in. I'm just wondering, how do you go about getting clientele with pockets that deep to start that process off? And I mean, it seems you've got no shortage of them over the years.
Well, it's again, we're just real fortunate that the cars that we've built over the years, people seem to like, and they want more of, right? So it shows like that, like SEMA and some of the other industry events that we've been fortunate enough to be a part of, and same thing with the industry magazines. People see those people that are car people are in all sorts of walks of life in all different parts of the world, and we're real fortunate that they've seen what we do, and at some point reach out and say, hey, I really like what you did with that Mustang or that Camaro or that truck or whatever it was. And, how can I start a discussion about maybe doing a build for me, right? And that's generally how it starts. There's a kind of a build request form on our website, and they'll fill that out. Or sometimes, like I said, they'll call direct, and depending on the circumstances, and we might have a conversation right there just about what it is that we're looking to do, and we'll just kind of lay it out from there. And one of the things that's important, from the beginning is for people to understand just how much time is involved in these builds, and just the parts cost. Things are, if it's the chassis, if it's the wheels, if it's the driveline, all these things have a figure attached to them, and then the time that it takes. So, we can outline pretty well what kind of hours we're looking at in some of these, and on a entry level build, we're still going to be 3,000 plus hours into one of these builds, and on the higher end, and being an example, we're 10,000 hours of labor into that truck. So it can vary immensely, and there also needs to be an understanding that throughout the build, things are going to change, directions are going to change, ideas are going to change, and that's a conversation that we have with the client throughout the course of the build, because a lot of times it's a collaboration of those ideas of, hey, what if we did this, and they get excited and they have ideas, and
It's constantly evolving during the build.
yeah, constantly, right? And you can very easily take a project at one point, and then we get excited about a certain aspect of it, or the customer wants to change direction a little bit, and kind of bump it up, and all of a sudden you're adding components, or maybe carbon fiber work or machining, or whatever the case may be. And so it's constantly evolving, and we're real fortunate to have worked with some clients that are, they're as excited about it as we are, and they're able to finance those level of exciting builds.
From the outside looking in, I would assume that one of the first qualifying discussions with any potential client is going to be around the dollar figure. I'd assume that people knowing the quality of your builds aren't going to expect it's cheap, but I'd also assume at the same time they could still be scared off. So is that one of the first sort of conversations that needs to be had?
Well, and it's difficult, right? Because you don't know the full scope of the build until you get further into it, but you're able to give examples, right, of previous builds. And then also just in having the conversation with that client, you're going to have a pretty good understanding of where they're at. They might have builds that have been built over the years by other, very talented builders. And you get an understanding that they're probably going to have a fairly well-rounded knowledge of what, some of these projects take, and what that cost is, and the ones that don't, we just have a real open, honest conversation about what kind of time could be involved.
Well, I guess when you're sort of talking 10,000 hours in a SEMA level build, I mean, straight away you're talking seven figures there just in labor costs alone before you even start factoring in any parts.
Right. And of course, and that one's an exception. Enyo was very special in that, but even on, let's say, in these other builds where we're 5,000 hours of labor, yeah, you're definitely you're up there just in the labor cost. And then, if we're doing any one-off parts, say we're doing, carbon fiber components and these sort of things, that's all discussions that we have, and we just try to establish where their ambitions are for this build and what they're seeing, and quite frankly, just a real, just honest question of like, what are you hoping to spend on this build? Now, then we can kind of work from there, right? Of like, all right, here's where that might fall into,
Yeah, I mean, everyone obviously, even multi-millionaires and billionaires have a budget. No one's just sort of throwing money around willy-nilly. And, once I sort of went through this process with my old performance workshop, a customer would come in, and often we were dealing, unfortunately, with younger enthusiasts who sort of had champagne dreams and maybe beer budgets. But they come in wanting an engine build, a turbo system, and maybe an ECU and a tune. And you'd sort of add all of that up, and all of a sudden you're, I don't know, was it 40 or 50K or whatever that might be, and you sort of see the look in their eyes, okay, well, this is probably 3 times what they were expecting. So then the next conversation is, okay, well, what's your budget? And then we would okay, well, for that budget, we can do this, this, and this. And, that sort of, you can always tailor a package to suit. The people listening now will probably be on the edge of their seats asking the question in their heads, so what does one of these builds cost? And obviously they're all going to vary, but could you give us an idea of a build? What was the sort of ballpark?
Yeah, entry level, you're going to be 600,000-700,000 probably, getting started, and then from there, the sky is the limit, right? It all comes down to how crazy we're going to get with design and the components and materials. There's a build that's real special that we're working on right now. I'm sure we'll talk about it, as we go on through the interview here. But it's an Aston Martin, and that one, you're getting into the high 7 figures there. You're at around that 2 million mark on that build, 2.2, and that comes down to the fact that every single component on that car is custom, is designed specifically for that build. And we're looking to do a couple of them. We want to build 2-3 of these things. We're real deep into one right now. It's going to be debuted in August out at the Quail in Monterey. That's on the higher end of those builds, right? It's everything that we can put into it with our technique, with our skills, with our tools, with technology is being put into that. And then on the other end of that spectrum, beautiful cars that are more traditionally built resto-mods with still all of the, just the crazy horsepower and everything that Ring Brothers cars have been known for, but you're still going to be in that 600,000-700,000 range for sure.
Okay. In terms of how the project sort of comes to life with the design elements, how much of it is customer driven versus how much sort of free reign and artistic license do Ring Brothers get in the design? And I'm guessing it probably is going to vary from project to project, but can you give us sort of a bit of a rundown?
Yeah, it absolutely varies. I'll tell you what, we have customers that it's kind of here's what I want, call me when it's done, so to speak. And, they want, hey, you guys do your thing, and I'm excited to see what you come up with. And then there's customers that want to be more involved, and we absolutely welcome that, because it's important, I think, for any car person to really know just what's going into these builds. And there's so much that you never see, when the car is complete. These things that happen all the way through the build up until paint and final assembly that you'll never ever see again, but they're all important things that need to be done. And it's really special when the customer is around to see those. But yeah, to answer your question on their involvement, we absolutely welcome it. It's fun when we have these conversations with the customer and you come up with ideas. And there's things, I tell you what, there's vehicles here in the last couple of years where some of the things that we ended up doing on them are my favorite things about those vehicles. But I probably would not have suggested it just on a purely budgetary standpoint, right? Where the customer's like, no, hey, how about this? That'd be cool. Like, okay, well, then you have the conversation of what that's going to add to the build. And they're like, oh, let's do it. And then it's odd. And a couple of them, like I said, it became my favorite part of the whole build. But just the cost prohibitive side of it, maybe you steer back because you're trying to stay within budget and not throw this complete wrench at it. But so when you get a customer that gets excited and you talk these ideas out and they give you the green light, well, that's really fun.
I find sometimes as well, I think just on that note, yes, you're trying to stick to a budget, but also when I'm looking at a couple of options for whatever I'm trying to do, and I'm viewing it through the lens of my own budget, but sometimes the customer's budget might be 10x or 100x what I'd be prepared to spend. So that makes it hard because you kind of pigeonhole yourself into what you would accept and do. But as you say, you run it past the customer and all of a sudden this $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 options, it's no problem. That's walking around change. Don't worry about it. let's go.
Yeah, and that's really fun, right? So it's fun when the customers are involved, and even the ones that are have less involvement, we're still talking about colors and interior samples, and we're going through all these things, all of the important questions. But there's some that we have conversation much more often, and that's fun. It's exciting too when we get to kind of help them steer through the process of what we're going to do, and at the same time, it's exciting when a customer lets us really just kind of go wild on it, and that's similar with this Aston Martin project that we're doing. We absolutely keep the customer up to date on everything that we're doing, but we're coming up with these ideas and then throwing them out there and building this car and keeping everybody updated with pictures and video and then getting that feedback of that they're really loving what we're doing with the build. That really helps drive us. If it's radio silence on the other end, then it's a little tough because you don't know if you're 100% going in the right direction.
Yeah. I guess with your location as well, you're not going to have all of your customers able to pop in every week and check on progress. So yeah, those updates are important.
I just wanted to take a moment out of our interview with Ryan and talk about one of our packages that's going to be perfect if you're enjoying what you're hearing and maybe you want to up your fabrication skills. And that, of course, is our fabrication starter package. Normally valued at $299. You can use the coupon code RING100 to get $100 off, bring it down to just $199. Now, while this is going to teach you the core fundamentals of fabrication, I will start here and now by saying that it's not overnight going to turn you into a fabricator at Ryan's level. That's still going to require some practice, but this will give you the best start possible. We begin with our Motorsport Fabrication Fundamentals course, and this teaches you all of the fundamentals of the skills and practical elements that go into motorsport fabrication, such as MIG welding, TIG welding, tube bending, notching. You'll learn about dimple dies. You'll learn about the techniques and skills you'll need to learn in order to start fabricating your own projects in your own workshop or garage. You'll also learn within this course the sort of tools that you're going to need to get started with. And suffice to say, you don't need to spend hundreds of thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars setting up your workshop initially to perform basic fabrication skills. This course really focuses on what you can achieve with the minimum initial outlay. Next up, we move into our practical TIG welding course, and as we've discussed with Ryan, this is really the tool of choice when it comes to welding materials together in a motorsport application. You've got the ability for a start to weld almost all of the materials together that we're likely to come across in a motorsport application, and you've got a lot more control over the weld itself as well as the amount of heat that's being input into the job or the workpiece. However, with all of this control comes the requirement to understand how the TIG welder works as well as how to correctly set it up for a particular material, and then of course how to fine-tune your settings to get the best possible weld. This course will cover all of this in detail. We even give you some quick start guides for welding different materials. We cover welding technique and how to also destructively test your welds to ensure that you're confident that your welds are strong and will hold up under motorsport use. On top of this, we're also including 24 months of gold membership, which gives you access to our private members only forum. This is the best place to get specific answers on your welding questions or fabrication questions. This gold membership also gives you access to our regular live weekly webinars where we cover a range of performance automotive topics from fabrication through to 3D modeling and scanning. We also cover engine building, engine tuning and wiring, just to name a few. If you can't watch these live, as a gold member, you get to review these in our archive where we've got over 300 hours of existing content. This is an absolute goldmine and one of the fastest ways to get you up to speed on a wide range of performance automotive topics. So that package, normally $299. Use that coupon code RING100, get $100 off, just $199. However, you can still break that down into as many as 8 individual weekly payments. And remember, you're always protected by our 60-day, no questions asked money back guarantee. So if you purchase and decide it's not quite right for you, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund of the purchase price. You'll find a link to that package as well as the coupon code in the show notes. Now, let's get back to our chat with Ryan.
Now, we've talked about budget. The question that sort of obviously follows that is time frame. Again, let's just focus on the top end SEMA builds. What's the sort of time frame for one of those builds typically?
We try to kick those out in 18 months.
Oh shit, that's actually significantly faster than I would have assumed. That's impressive.
Yeah, we really like to push ourselves on that, and part of that is that we're a small company, and we don't do dozens and dozens of builds every year. There might be three a year at that level, and what that allows us to, and they're at varying stages, of course, right? So when one's in the body shop, one's just coming in, and one's in middle of fabrication and that sort of thing. But once we get hot on a vehicle that we're going to do this build, and we get with Roadster Shop and we get that chassis ordered up, and as soon as that thing hits the floor, we've got the donor vehicle, we've got a game plan, and we get after it. And we're real fortunate with the team that we have, that we're able to kind of sync all of our different aspects of that build and be able to do things kind of overlapping one another, instead of just this, then this, then this. We're able to kind of jump around a little bit, just knowing the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing, so to speak.
That must be quite an impressive process to line all of those ducks up. I mean, I just know with the smaller projects we're involved in, you inevitably sort of get so far through a project and then you're stalled because you're waiting on suspension, which is a 8-week lead time or whatever, and that's just seems to be constant, which is super frustrating. So do you use any workshop management software or anything like that, or is this manual?
It's manual, and what it really comes down to is communication amongst, all of our different departments, and just really coming together every day on expectations and lead times, and kind of just marking out and coming up with a specific dates, just manually on like, hey, when can we get this done? And then say it's something that the machine shop's going to, machine. If we have an idea of when we expect that to be done, then in the fab shop, we can make sure that that day that it gets done, we're ready. Everything that needs to be in place is in place for that part to get mounted, and it's that times 100 processes, right? Like, and it is challenging, and it's a lot of emails and phone calls, and just making sure that everybody's on the same page with it, and then of course making adjustments where necessary, because things get off schedule, and that's just part of it. But then being able to adjust and make up for it and not let that stall the project is really important. And at the end of the day is having that team that is willing to just put it in and really focus themselves on the project. And we all get excited about it, especially when they get kind of past that middle point of the build where it's really starting to look like something, and now you're really building the cool stuff, right? Like all the substructure is done, all of
the stuff no one's going to see,
right? That's all done, and now you're building the really fun stuff, and that's where like you don't want to stop for lunch. You don't want to put your tools down for nothing. You're just excited about the build. And I'll tell you what, after myself, 25 years of doing this, Mike and Jim, 31 plus years of doing this, there isn't a day where I wake up and don't want to get down here as soon as I possibly can. It's just,
yeah, I can hear the enthusiasm in your voice, which is cool.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's just a really special thing and a special company that we've got here, and our team is just, everybody's really excited about everything we do, and that makes it so rewarding.
We've talked about budget, and obviously, as we discussed, you can kind of give a new client a range, but obviously once you've sort of qualified the client and you've done your sort of initial first date and figure out you want to go further, the client's probably going to want a more solid idea of what his particular project's going to cost. And I can just imagine this almost being an impossibility. I always struggled. How do you go about pricing and setting customer expectations? And then just as importantly, as we've already talked about, as the build progresses, things change, bits get added, expenses change. How do you keep the sort of price expectations and estimates updated with your clients?
Yeah, so it's it is tough. You're right, and it's one of those things that it's so varied from project to project that you can't just say, well, a '69 Mustang costs X amount, right? That's an impossibility. So what we try to outline best we can what the scope of the build is going to be, and then we can look at previous builds and and kind of pull from there of what those time frames looked like, right? If we did whatever it was, say we widened the car, we know what a roadster shop chassis is going to be. We can look up and price out the drive line and wheels and suspension. And
Yeah, I feel like the hard parts, though, that's probably the easier part. It's the time, it's the labor.
right. And that's what I was going to say. There's a number of things that you can quantify just by looking it up or Googling it, right? Over here's what that costs. The hard part is in knowing just what it's going to take in time, because these things are made by hand, and the things that aren't made by hand, things that are, say, carbon fiber or machine, well, chances are we haven't made them before, so we can take our best educated estimate at what kind of time it's going to be to design it, and then to actually get the material and to cut it out, or to make it in carbon, or to make it by hand. And at the end of the day, we're really just having to rely on our own experience of what these things take, and then to really have a conversation with the customer that just lets them know that, like, hey, these are our best estimates, and we try to keep those at the higher level so that there's no surprises at the end. But it really is tough, and one of the things that is just really important is to just have open and honest communication with the customer of, like, hey, these things are so varied and they're so labor intensive that you just don't know until you get into it. And there's, for every one thing you do know, engine, transmission, wheels, there's 100 things that even if you've done 50 of these cars, you don't think of until you're into it, right? And some of these things are just so pricey, right? Like fuel line. I mean, you can be 30, 40, $50 a foot on fuel line. And, it's that times every single part. And we try to really lay those out and go through, where every part that we're going to need is, and to try to do the best we can on giving an estimate, but also looking at past builds and seeing how close we were at the end and kind of making those adjustments there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You've got enough runs on the board there. All the builds obviously are different, but you could probably back price your existing builds and kind of get a pretty close ballpark, probably closer than someone who's trying to do this for the first time, where you just don't know what you don't know.
Right. Yeah. And, if you're doing it for the first time, I would say take your best guess and double it.
And then double it again.
Right. I mean, really, like, oh, I should be able to do that in a week. Well, 2.5 weeks later, you're just about done. That's kind of how you have to remember to think about it.
Okay. One of the big parts of any of these builds is sort of the chassis itself, and we've already talked a little bit about this with resto-mods. You've mentioned your partner Roadster Shop there a number of times. What is it about Roadster Shop that make them the obvious choice when it comes to a new chassis, and that versus trying to bring that sort of construction and fabrication in-house?
Right. Well, I tell you what, so, partnering with the best is what's critical to us. And what the best means to us is multitude of things. Number one, just the skill and what it is that they're doing in their end product. We've never had a problem with one of their chassis, as far as the structural integrity, safety, all of those things. They're all just been spot on. Along with that, great guys, great company to work with. If there's ever an issue, like, they're right there to help us out with it. From a builder's standpoint, we come up with some of these vehicles that a chassis doesn't exist for, right? So this is our second Rolls Royce. Both of them have Roadster Shop chassis. That Aston Martin, Roadster Shop chassis. That Chevy truck that we did, same thing, Roadster Shop chassis. And all of those were one-off chassis for this build. So their willingness to work with us and take a 3D scan, or we send the whole donor car down, and then their engineers design a chassis based on the specs that we need. With, we've done stuff with cantilevered and suspension with custom Olin shocks specific for that build that are incorporated into the suspension with their chassis. All of those things are special and unique in the sense that you can't just call up anybody and just have a custom chassis design for a vehicle that they've never built one for previously. So that willingness to work with us on, number one, design, aesthetic, and performance, that is really critical. And then on top of that, the fact that we don't have to wait 5 years to get the thing.
That's important.
We're trying to hold to these 18-month build times. Being able to get something designed and out the door and in our fab shop as quick as possible is really important. And they're tops at that. It's something that's really important to us, is that lead time.
Yeah. I'm guessing there as well, with some of the more intricate, over-the-top suspension designs with cantilevered suspension, etc., that they're going through with their own software and working out the suspension kinematics. So that's something you just don't have to worry about inside Ring Brothers. That's done for you.
Right. And that's where it's important. You talked about bringing it in-house. Well, obviously, logistically speaking, you need, another space, you need more people and all these sorts of things. But also just the fact that, that is their niche. That is what they do. They're good at it. They're engineers. That's their only focus. Sometimes just having the ability to lean on somebody who is the best at their particular craft, that is way more important to us than being able to say that we did it 100% in-house, because it's really critical that the knowledge that they carry from the probably, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of chassis they've built, that knowledge is invaluable when it comes to building a new chassis for us. And they go, oh, this is not going to work, or we need to do this, because, they've done it and they've seen it in other variations, and just being able to rely on that knowledge base is critical.
Yeah, I think it's always a tough one when you're running a business with so many varying processes and parts involved, to decide what's worthy of bringing in-house and what's worthy of relying on external contractors or businesses to work with. And I think you nailed it there, though. There's definitely an advantage in terms of control and sometimes time frame from doing everything in-house, but then why reinvent the wheel? The likes of Roadster Shop, that's their niche. They're incredibly good at it, so leverage the best. And I guess it's sort of a case of stay in your lane. You guys get to stay doing what you're exceptionally good at and still get the best of the best for these other parts.
Right, exactly.
All right, I'm just interested as well in terms of when you're sort of getting to the final stages of the project, in terms of finishing options. So obviously bodywork, paint's a no-brainer, but in terms of other parts, anodizing versus powder coating versus the likes of Cerakote versus paint, what pros and cons of each? How do you make a decision?
Well, it really varies, and we use all of them, honestly. Cerakote has its place. There's a lot, I like Cerakote for a couple of different reasons. It's super durable. It's super thin. We can put it on, so many of our machined components, suspension components and spindles and that sort of thing. And you don't have the buildup of paint, but you've got the durability of something like an anodize. It's really great. And those decisions come down, honestly, to what the best use and best application is going to be, what the use of that part is, right? If it's a suspension component or it's a control arm or something, or an engine block, what is that part going to see for usage, and what's going to be the most durable and best looking, right? So, a lot of our stuff is, a lot of the billet stuff is anodized, hood hinges and brackets and that sort of thing. And, a lot of the suspension components will be in Cerakote, not as much with the powder. Now, like on the Rolls-Royce chassis, that is a powder-coated chassis, and a lot of the components for that, control arms and suspension components and stuff, are powder-coated. But for the most part, we use a lot of paint and Cerakote where applicable. On the anodized stuff, it really depends. But a lot of the machine stuff that we do, on our production line for sure is a lot of anodizing. But in our, say, SEMA builds, we'll paint out a lot of those billet components to body match or color match with the opposing color or something. So then it's in paint.
Yep, no, that makes sense. Other big part of a build, obviously, is the powertrain, engine, and gearbox. And again, in 31 years of operation, technology's changed a lot. The modern crop of these performance V8s and modern automatic transmissions, obviously electronic control has become a massive factor in this. How are you dealing with this? Because you can end up in a situation where you've got some incredibly complex wiring to make all of the necessary modules talk to each other. You mentioned earlier Holly Dominator and Terminator ECUs. Are all of your builds on an aftermarket standalone? Are you doing anything with OE ECUs? Is this, in terms of the wiring and integration, is this something that's handled in-house, or are you outsourcing that as well?
So it's all in-house. To answer your question on what we're using, so it really depends. I can tell you on the last few Hemis that we did, so Charger, CUDA, and one Charger before that, that was all Mopar computer ECU. But the other ones that we've done have been with the Holly Dominator Terminators, and that's all in-house. We've got guys that are really really skilled in laying out the wiring for this. And we also have a really strong partnership with our engine tuner. His cell phone he keeps it close to him when we're at the assembly stage of a build, because there's so many sensors on these things. And, some of it's pretty unique where like this sensor requires, 0.5 volts or, these breakdowns where it's not like in the old days where, red's positive and black's negative and that's all there is to it. Now everything's got modules and different components and all sorts of relays and all back to the ECU. So it's important to have an understanding of that, and we've got guys that are really gifted in laying that out. And a lot of times we'll take a painless harness or a stock harness for the motor. Usually we'll break that all down, cut it apart, and then kind of relay out that harness to our needs and aesthetically. But then it also gives us an opportunity of what does this thing do, and then call the guy that knows, right? And determine whether or not we need it or where it goes or what we need to do with it to make these vehicles run. Because, it's extremely critical. But I tell you what, once you get these things dialed in and running, I mean, after that, you can do it with your cell phone pretty much. You sit down with a laptop and plug into your port and you can dial it up. And then after that, it's turnkey, you're ready to go. It's going to take care of itself.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just as engine technology's changed, so has basically all of the technology in the fabrication and motorsport industry. How long has it been that Ring Brothers have been sort of leveraging some of these technologies such as 3D scanning, CAD, 3D modeling, 3D printing, etc.?
Right. So, as soon as we hear a technology, we're interested in whether or not we can utilize it. Back in the early days with the machining and whatnot, and when they developed the first billet hood hinges, that was something that was not in every hot rod shop, right? A CNC machine doing production parts and engineers designing these components that hadn't been designed or built or even thought of before. So they've really always focused on trying to utilize what new technology exists. And we're real fortunate to have some partnerships with different companies that are on the cutting edge of their own particular fields. So we get a unique look at some of the upcoming technologies. I'll tell you one of them. I keep talking about that Aston Martin. We're partnered with Gentex on that vehicle, and they're doing some pretty amazing things. And one of the things that they make in their company and that we're using in this Aston Martin are self-dimming visors. So they're a clear visor, right? And it senses the level of sunlight, just like with a sensor right on the visor there, and they will dim to the appropriate darkness, just like sunglasses. But you're able to look right through your visor, and it's really incredible from clear to dark like sunglasses.
So kind of like a auto darkening TIG welding mask, but not maybe quite that extreme.
Precisely, yeah, and it's stuff like that we hear about it and like, oh, well, how do we use it? How can we utilize that? How can we put that into one of our builds? Same with the 3D printing. It started with the composites, plastics, and whatnot, and then now with 3D printing metals. Absolutely, every new technology that we hear about, we want to explore and see if it can benefit our builds and how we can use it. Because again, that's one of those things that excites us, right? Is that here's this new capability that we didn't previously have, and how can we put that into one of these builds?
Obviously, with the 3D modeling, and then that's followed up closely by the 3D printing world, prototyping, and even sometimes making final parts out of plastic with either FDM or resin printing. The equipment to do that is relatively modestly priced. So that's generally within reach of most enthusiasts, not all, of course. When you start talking about 3D printing with metal, that's a different deal. I mean, I've talked to 3D systems on the podcast before, and an entry-level metal printer is going to be probably north of $50,000 or $100,000 and goes way up from there. Is this something that you bring in-house? Are you leveraging sort of jobbing shops to do 3D printing of metal?
Right, in the metal, yes, that's something that we're outsourcing. We've got a mid-sized printer for the composites and plastics in-house, where we're able to make our prototype parts and then sometimes our final use parts. But with the metal, yes, we're absolutely outsourcing that. And that's, again, for that reason, right, that there's people that are just that good at that particular field, and they've got the equipment for it.
Well, I think probably more than that, you get to leverage the shop that's got maybe a $200,000 or $300,000 printer And we've just done this with Connor's just done a 3D printing course. I think it's releasing pretty soon. And as part of that, we went through the process of designing, I say we, I had no part in it. I wouldn't know where to get started. He designed a pretty intricate 4-into-1 collector. And it was sort of it swirls around. It's something you couldn't easily fabricate by hand, otherwise you just would. And I mean, we got that printed, I think, for around about $600, which for what it was, I thought, hey, that's very well priced. So I think it's important, like, for enthusiasts, when you're talking about these technologies and they're thinking, well, yeah, that's great, but I don't have $500,000 to dump into a metal printer. Well, yeah, you don't have to. You can still leverage these technologies for what is not a huge amount of money.
Right.
In terms of the CNC machining, I'm interested here. We've talked about it a couple of times, and obviously you've got your product range, and this might drive the answer to this. Why bring CNC machining in-house as opposed to leveraging an external supplier? Because that's another area where, not too different to 3D metal printing, you've got a lot of money tied up in a 5-axis CNC.
Right. So, a couple things. One is being able to maintain our quality control constantly on every single product that's going into a machine. But then also, so often, through these builds, the things that we need, we don't know we need them until it's time to get it, right. And if we have that capability in house, we're able to kind of move things around and get something designed and maybe 3D printed, put in place. Yep, all right, we know it works, and then get that thing made in aluminum or steel, whatever the case may be. But just to have that capability of the access to building those parts as we need them. And it's always, for us, anytime that you are putting your schedule at the will of an outside source, right? And then it's kind of up in the air. You're losing some control on whether or not that deadline date is going to be met. And if it's in-house, we know it.
Yeah, it comes back to that control that I was talking about earlier.
Right. So that's part of it. And then on top of that, like I said, just the idea of, being able to visually see what exactly we have going on at any point and be able to change direction if necessary is real important.
Yeah, okay. In terms of using CAD for the design of these, plus obviously with 3D scanning, are you developing all of these high-end builds entirely in a CAD model prior to the first piece of metal being cut, or does that not always make sense?
Sure. So not always. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. On these more really elaborate builds, the Aston Martin being one of them, 100% designed in CAD before we started bending the first piece of metal. Right. We had the full scope of the build, what it's going to look like, what we're going to do with it as we got started. And that was important because that entire build is carbon fiber. Right. So we've got metal chassis and floor suspension, of course, is all steel, but every component outside of that, every visible component is carbon fiber. And of course, that all has to be designed in CAD. So then the entire vehicle is, so we make sure that everything is able to fit together. And that goes back to what we were talking about too with, we're able to have our guys in the machine shop build the rear bumper, which is as an example, it's a billet rear bumper for that car. They're able to build that before we have the part that it's going to attach to.
And you're going to know it'll fit perfectly.
Right. And we know it's going to fit. Now in other builds, say one that we're also just working on right now, 69 Mustang. We widened it 1.5 inches on each side. Super cool car. But we didn't do that in CAD. Certain components were. There's carbon fiber components that, of course, were designed in CAD and hood and spoiler and these different things. And, we're going to work on the interior and that sort of thing. But that build overall was designed and built in more traditional way where we're talking it out and kind of some hand sketches of this is what it's going to look like, but it's not necessarily in CAD.
Yeah. I think it's important for listeners to understand that it's not very black and white. There's a variety of tools for the job, and it's all about choosing the correct tool for a particular job, and that's not always going to be a full CAD model, and it's also very time consuming to build an entire car in CAD, albeit yes, with the more elaborate ones, probably that time can be justified and will pay off, particularly if you get yourself into a situation where you're planning on making more than one, which you've mentioned with this Aston. Now, one of the questions I had for you was sort of if you could take us through what sticks out to you as maybe one of your favorite builds, and this Aston just keeps on popping up. I'm wondering if we could maybe dive into it in a bit more detail. I think I actually had the opportunity to get some sneak peek at some renders that Hunter Ring had on his phone when we were in SEMA at dinner. But yeah, can you talk us through it? So how did the project come about, and what's the idea behind it?
Yeah. So I tell you what, it's real exciting. The customer that we're building this one for, he had talked about doing a build, and what Mike and Jim kind of came up with. He had asked, said, what do you guys want to do? And they said, well, we always kind of wanted to do a European muscle car. Okay, well, he went home and he Googled European muscle car, and what came up was an Aston Martin DBS. So we sourced one, and we started from there. Started coming up with ideas, renders, and deciding what we're going to do for a power plant, and what this car was going to basically look like, and really that's how the whole thing got started going. But yeah, completely carbon fiber car. I think we're 8.5 or 9 inches wider overall in the back, something like 6 or 5 or 6 in the front, but completely carbon fiber. It's just beautiful. It's got big hips and dives in the middle, hourglass figure on this vehicle, nice and low. And we've got a roadster shop chassis underneath of it. The fabrication on all of the substructure components and what we're doing with the clamshell hood and the way that we did all of the engine bay components and everything that goes throughout the driver's compartment, the roll cage system, is just really exciting build to be a part of. Torque tube car, so it's got a transaxle out of C6 Corvette in the rear. It's always interesting to we've done this is the third one now that we've done with the transaxle, and that in itself provides a number of challenges from a fabrication standpoint, from a builder standpoint, but from a driving standpoint and aesthetically, honestly, it's just super cool. It's just rad. They're just really, really cool.
Okay, so a bunch of things I want to sort of dive into in a bit more detail there. Let's start with the last of those, which is the transaxle. So for those who haven't heard that term, instead of the gearbox being directly bolted to the back of the engine and then a differential being in the rear, now you've got your gearbox and your differential as one unit, and that is all moved to the rear, incorporating the clutch, and then we've got a torque tube that runs, or a prop shaft that runs back to the engine. Generally, I mean, there's a few reasons for doing that, but I mean, one of the advantages, as I see it, is kind of weight distribution, probably getting the car kind of a bit more balanced. I'm going to make the bold assumption here that aesthetics for your builds probably far outweigh the performance, or am I off the mark there? Basically, I guess where I'm going with that is how important to one of your builds is weight distribution.
Right. So, I mean, it's different for every build. There's customers that have intentions of driving the beans out of these things, and that's great. But I tell you what, with everything that we build, every car and every part on every one of those cars, the component needs to work, it needs to function, and it needs to be the appropriate part for that car, right? So in other words, we're not putting something on just for the sake of putting it on, or because it looks cool, or because it's the new trendy thing. Like, we want it, whether or not this is going to get driven like a race car, we want everyone to know that if you took it on a racetrack, it's going to perform like a race car. So with that being said, that transaxle and the weight distribution, like, that was important. Whether or not it will actually see use that requires that level of detail down to the distribution of weight is beside the point. It's the fact that it does exist. It was thought about. That was built into the plan, and that's one of the things that excites us and honestly our customers. Right? They know that the capabilities are there, and the performance level is right there. If they ever want to take it on the track, it's ready to go.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Another element with this build, the carbon fiber and carbon fiber composites have come up a few times in the chat so far. It seems for me looking at the builds from the outside in, that carbon fiber is becoming a more popular or more common material for you to use. I'm interested, sort of, what do you see? Again, carbon fiber in a performance or race sense, there's the obvious advantages of the lighter weight. But again, I'm guessing that's probably not the primary concern here. So how do you decide whether you're going to use steel or carbon fiber, and pros and cons of each?
Right. So in this case, with any of the builds that we're using carbon fiber components, we're able to design those in CAD, make it exactly what we want it to be. And then to help with those timeframes that we try to stick to, we're able to have that carbon fiber component being built while we're doing, say, X, Y, or Z on the vehicle, where we don't necessarily need that part. Say we're doing the hood in carbon. Well, we can be building the whole rest of the car before the hood shows up, and then it just shows up and it's done. And that amount of time that it took to design it and construct it still exists, but it didn't take away from.
It's been done in parallel.
Right, exactly. That's one consideration. The other consideration is in whether or not we want it to be cosmetic carbon. So very often we'll have it be an exposed weave, and that's part of the aesthetic look, that maybe the spoiler or the underside of the hood or the rockers or something are carbon and they're going to stay exposed carbon. And that comes down to if we want it to look like that, and that would be a decision made over steel. And then, like with this Aston, we've got a clamshell hood, so the entire front clamshell will tilt forward, and then weight is a very strong consideration. If we had built that in aluminum or steel or something, just the weight of what that would be prohibitive to it functioning in the way that we want it to. So that's, there's a lot of different considerations, and each one is taken into account before we decide which direction we're going to go.
No, fair play. Possibly going a little too deep down this particular rabbit hole, but just because it's of interest to me, if you're not going with carbon fiber for an aesthetic finish in terms of like a raw carbon look or a clear coat over the carbon, and it is being finished in traditional paint, are the problems in terms of not having the weave ending up visible through the finished paint? And my experience with carbon fiber is that it can come out of the paint shop looking perfect, but then after 6 months of exposure to UV, just being out in the heat of the sun, I kind of almost find that the carbon weave tends to maybe move. I'm not a composites expert, so I could be completely off the mark. But what I'm saying is it can look like glass when it first comes out of the spray booth, and then as it ages maybe over 6 to 12 months, you sort of can see in certain lights that carbon weave beneath it. So I'm just wondering, is that a real issue for you guys as well? And if so, how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so that's a real thing, and there's a few different ways to deal with it. One is frankly, in the color of the vehicle. Some colors show that weave pull through more than others, and when it does, it's typically when there's a variation in temperature. It'll settle back in, but it'll, if it's there once, it'll never go back to that perfect, like fresh out of the booth, like you said. So we try to mitigate that as much as possible, and that can be done in a variety of ways. One is when these parts are finished, and when you run them through an autoclave for the construction of the carbon fiber itself, it's going to mitigate some of that weave wanting to pull through. Additionally, the body work that's done after the fact on top of that carbon, that's going to help. And then also when we get the non-cosmetic carbon back, it'll have a coating on it already that is, it's not just weave and then primer and paint. It's got a coating that's from the carbon fiber folks, and that helps that as well dramatically. But really, it's being, just using that carbon responsibly and
understanding, I guess, the material, the product that you're working with, be it steel, aluminium, or carbon fiber, each have their own intricacies in understanding how that material is going to sort of function and operate over time. Now, you've already basically said that you're dealing with a third party for the composites, and I'm guessing that kind of covers the two things we've already talked about. You can stay in your lane, you're leveraging an industry expert who's exceptionally good at composite work, and then, as you also mentioned, now you get the time frame advantage because these things can be done in parallel. I sort of tick all those boxes there.
Right, exactly. And I just want to speak one more thing to having them be just as talented as they are with the carbon fiber. There's stuff, and it goes back to what we were talking about before. There was a couple parts on this Aston Martin where, we'd send over the CAD file, and we're on the phone, and he opens it up and he goes, like, how am I going to make a mold for this, or how am I going to get it out of the mold? How am I going to line up the weave and all these things?
It sounds like a him problem to me.
Right. But I tell you what, the way that these guys are able to lay that carbon down, and if you look at one of these builds, the carbon weave will stack up from tip to tail. The angles are very well thought out. And that's another thing back to designing the whole car from scratch is, say the front spoiler may have been made at the beginning stages of the build and the rear spoiler at the end stages, but knowing where those things are going to be, and then everybody being on the same page with how we want that carbon to lay out, if we're going to do a V pattern where it's split down the middle or whatever the case is. It's really interesting and really beautiful when it all comes together and everything, two parts line up that were made 6 months outside of each other.
That's the attention to detail that, it's hard to get.
It speaks to their talent. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think we'll go back to kind of where I'd planned to start this conversation. So we're a little bit out of order, but I don't really think it matters. We really haven't talked much about fabrication itself other than how you got your start. And I just wanted to come at this maybe more from an enthusiast level in terms of the equipment that's available. And I wanted to start by talking about some of the equipment, and welding's obviously a big part of fabrication. In terms of your options, you're talking about getting started with a stick welder or arc welder. Hey, it gets the job done. You're not going to find probably one of those being used in many motorsport fabrication shops these days, thankfully. Still got their place in industry, but not in our industry. TIG welding's kind of the go-to for motorsport and high-end fabrication, with a lot of control over the amount of heat you're inputting into the material. It's obviously able to weld a very wide variety of materials if you've got an AC/DC TIG. On that basis, is there still a case study for the good old MIG welder in fabrication?
There of course is, and it comes down to what you're doing with it, right? And honestly, your skill level, if you're a home fabricator, home car builder, and you're extremely skilled in MIG welding and maybe not so much in TIG, well, you need to use, number one, what you're able to get results with. Always push yourself, right? If you take some classes and learn TIG, there's the benefits of being able to TIG weld are extreme. For us, the MIG gets used very infrequently. To be quite frank with you, it's going to be used when we're building a jig or a structure, or a temporary, something to hold the car, or an engine stand or something like that. But on the builds, we're TIG welding just about everything. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for it outside of these level of builds, because there's been a lot of cars built with a gas welder, with a MIG welder, and they absolutely have their place. And there's just a speed factor to, say you're putting in floorboards in your car, and you ordered new floors and you've drilled out all the spot welds and you're dropping in these new floors. Well, to be able to just fill those plug welds with a MIG and get your project back on the road, there's no reason that you have to TIG weld something like that. So there's definitely a place, but for our purposes, 99% of everything we're doing is being TIG welded.
Yeah, as you would expect. But yeah, there's that's not always going to be what the average home enthusiast needs to be working at that level. From my standpoint, I've done both MIG welding and TIG welding at a very average level. I think the clear advantage with MIG welding is when you're coming into this industry with no knowledge at all, much, much easier to lay down a decent MIG weld that's got good penetration and is going to be safe and strong, compared to, there's a lot more that goes into doing the same with a TIG welder. Would you agree with that?
Right, absolutely. Yes, for sure.
Okay, so in terms of TIG welding itself as well, maybe if you could give us your sort of maybe top 3 tips for how to get the best results with a TIG welder, be it you're welding aluminium, chromoly, stainless steel, whatever that might be. What are the things that most who are new to TIG welding are overlooking and getting wrong that's holding them back from laying down those nice stacked dime welds?
Right. The toughest one that people usually get a TIG welder for is aluminum, right? And that's a lot of times the driving force from switching from a MIG to a TIG is because they want to be able to do aluminum, or they want to be able to do pretty stainless or something, or they're doing exhaust. But with aluminum specifically, the biggest thing is the material has to be clean. Your tungsten has to be clean. If you're using any sort of wire brush or anything to prep that metal, it needs to only have been used on aluminum. Any impurities from a wire brush that was used on steel, or a grinding disc that was used on steel and then transferred to the aluminum, is going to mess it all up. Having it be as clean as you possibly can is going to make the difference between what looks like somebody who's never touched a welder before and somebody that can lay down a weld that should be on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And with steel, honestly, just practice. That really is what it boils down to. I remember when I got my first TIG welder, the welding supply guy brought it. I ordered it from him, and he brought it to the shop, and basically showed me how to turn it on, how to set it up, and he welded a little bit, and then just handed it to me and said, just mess up a lot. Just don't try to build something. Just sit down at the end of the day and just burn through rod, and eventually it'll click. And he was right. And that's what it takes. It's just.
I mean, it's the old 10,000 hour story. That's always been the line, is to become expert in anything you want to do. It's 10,000 hours, and
Right.
yeah, I think that probably really holds true for TIG welding. Yes, there's the background knowledge that you're going to need in terms of, well, how do I set up my machine for this particular material? What filler rod should I be using? All of those things, gas flow. But then once your actual settings are dialed, you're just going to have to put in the repetitions.
Right. Yeah, you can Google and look up all of the answers to those things you just mentioned, but as far as just getting into your rhythm, that's a you thing, and you just need to just sit down and do it. And like I said, eventually, all of a sudden you'll stand back and be impressed with yourself, and that's a really good feeling. And hopefully every weld after that, you're going to have bad days, of course, but what you're impressed with now, 5 years from now, you're going to laugh at what you were impressed with 5 years ago. And it continues on. And that's a really great feeling.
I think that's a problem for most home enthusiast project cars, when you've got a build that's pretty extensive and maybe it spans 3 or 4 years because you're doing it on weekends or after work. And obviously at the start of that, just as you said, your skill set is going to be limited. The quality of your welding is going to reflect that. And of course, as you progress through the project, the welding at the end is going to be significantly better than what you had at the start. So it's always sort of a bit of a pill to swallow, going back and looking at some of the earlier parts of the project and like, oh shit, I really could do that better. But at the same time, you've got to sort of stop letting perfection be the enemy of good enough. Maybe not in your particular instance, but I'm talking for us mere mortals in the garage.
Right.
The point you made there about cleanliness, I think that was what I was hoping you're going to be touching on, because I think aluminium is a special case there, but everything that you weld, like the more time you put into prep and cleaning, the smoother the job goes. The other thing I would probably say from my own standpoint, and if it's something like roll cage tubing where your joint between two tubes, the fit up, the more time you can spend on that fit up, the less gap you've got to try and fill with a TIG, particularly if you're dealing with something sensitive to heat like chromoly, the better the finished result. So it's almost like the fit up and the cleanliness is probably 80% of the job, and the actual welding's 20%. I don't know if I've got my ratios quite right, but does that sort of fit with what you see?
Yeah, I would give you that for sure. And that's, as you were speaking, that's exactly the word that comes to mind, is fit up, right? If you have a gap that you have to fill, you're going to be putting more heat into the metal to get it to fill. If the weld isn't going to look the way you want it to, and at the end of the day, it's not going to be as structurally perfect as what it would be had you had that proper fit up, because now your weld is bridging that gap, and that strength is only in your filler material, not that you're melting the two parent metals together along with a filler. You're just straight up bridging an open void with filler material, and that's frankly just not the way to do it. So you're going to have a lot better results from a structural standpoint, and then also from a pride standpoint. When you stand back and look at your welds, if you get that fit up, you're miles ahead in making that stack of dimes look like everybody wants their welds to look like.
I think that's actually another argument for MIG welding when you're very entry level at fabrication, because while we've just talked about fit up and glossed over that like it's really easy to achieve, I mean, the reality is it's difficult, and when you're learning to fabricate, you're probably going to struggle to get that perfect fit up. MIG welding is going to do a better job of bridging any gaps that you do have. I mean, you still obviously want your fit up as good as possible, but you've got a little bit more leniency, I guess, with the MIG.
Yeah, it's more forgiving for sure. And I'll tell you what, I don't care if you've been doing this 2 years or 40 years. There's times where you just have to fill a hole like that. It happens. It happens, right? It happens to all of us. But you strive for that cleanliness, fit up, all of those things. It's all extremely important. And if you're always shooting for the best you can possibly get, well, then you're really bringing down those that gap you're trying to fill. It's not a big one. It's not, your parts aren't clicking together like Legos, but you also don't have there's not a giant hole. So you're always shooting for that perfect fit up. Then you're going to be in good shape.
I think that comes almost full circle back to one of the earliest topics we were talking about of what separates an average fabricator from an excellent one. And I think that attention to detail, the pride in the work, and the patience, because getting that fit up perfect is going to take a lot longer than getting the fit up just average and close enough's good enough, and sometimes it's not.
Right.
I'm just wondering if you could give a couple of pointers to home enthusiasts maybe looking to purchase their first MIG or TIG welder. Is there anything they should be looking for in a suitable machine that's up to the task of, home garage, home workshop, MIG and TIG welding, that's also not necessarily 10,000 USD?
Right. So on the MIG, I can tell you, well, here in the States anyway, we've got a like your Tractor Supply, your Farm and Fleet. It's your implement kind of store, and they usually have MIG welders and stick welders and stuff farmers would use, right? And really, any of those, if you have one that's 220 is the voltage that we run here in the States, that's going to weld anything from sheet metal up to 1/4 inch or 5/16 inch plate. You'll have to do the conversions at home for millimeters. I don't know them off the top of my head, but
1/4 inch, call it about 6 millimeters. Thereabouts. And I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out as well, because in sort of motorsport fabrication, it would be rare that we're going to need to weld anything thicker than 1/4 inch.
Right, exactly. But for your home guy, if he's building the jig, or he's building a bench, or he's building a welding table or something, it's important to to have the equipment to be able to do all those things. You're not probably just using it to fabricate cars. You're building all sorts of stuff around the house. Or
it's a good point, actually, because the utility of a MIG welder and also the speed of welding, which we touched on earlier compared to TIG, you can do a pretty easy job of building yourself workshop benches and fitting out your workshop using the MIG.
Exactly. So, really any of them that are 220 volts are going to serve the purpose great. The 110 volts, the little buzz boxes, they're fine for just sheet metal, but anything above that, and you're really going to struggle. And it's really not safe. Say a roll cage or anything structural on your chassis, you wouldn't want to weld with one of those smaller welders. Brand, I'm not specific on the MIG. When we get to the TIGs, the Miller welders that we use, the Dynasties, they're just incredible. Your home guy doesn't need a water-cooled TIG welder. We do, because we're running that thing 8-9 hours a day, right? And especially if we're on aluminum, that really, really, you're really cooking. But your home welder, an air-cooled Miller, the tools that you use are going to help you in your craft. And especially with like welding aluminum, that Dynasty, I tell you what, you can strike an arc on a room temperature piece of aluminum and immediately be off to the races. I've had welders in the past where you need to preheat the metal quite a bit before it's going to even start to remotely do anything resembling a proper weld. But with those Dynasties from Miller, it really, you step on the pedal and you're off to the races. So the little bit of extra expense, and you're going to have a welder that's going to last you a lifetime. You can get the off-brand, tool supply store welders, and they might be fine for a project, but something that, you have for 20, 30, 40 years, that's always going to be serviceable. You spend a little bit extra, and that's what I recommend to people. We get that question quite a bit on what, we would recommend for somebody that's building a car at home or whatever. And I say spend that money, because just the usability and the ease of use, it outweighs the cost savings on a cheaper unit.
Yeah, I think that old saying, buy once, cry once, really sort of comes into play here. I mean, obviously everyone has a budget, so, it has to suit the budget, but I think it is definitely worth spending good money on a good quality TIG that maybe from the outset is more advanced than what you need, but that TIG is going to last you a lifetime, and you'll be able to grow into some of that functionality. Also, just in terms of, again, if we're looking at welding up to, say, 1/4 inch plates, 6.5 mil, what sort of amp rating do we need to be looking for in a TIG welder to cover that range?
So like ours in our fab shop, they range between 200 and 280. The big one at 280, that's, like when we're welding some of our big billet components, like that bumper for the Aston Martin, right? So it's a 3-piece just because of the size of it. Then we're welding these three pieces together, and that's a big chunk of billet. So we're cranked at 280, and we're preheating just to get the absolute best weld that we possibly can. But generally speaking, if you're welding sheet metal, aluminum, you're building, panels and that sort of thing, you're at a 130, maybe something like that. And you're able to, it's going to be all that you need, really.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no, that's good. Good intel. We've covered briefly welding. I mean, we could have probably done a couple of podcasts alone. It is a very complex topic, but I also want to cover some of the other fabrication equipment that you're sort of going to be using on the daily basis. So, yeah, what's in your toolbox? What are you relying on?
So I tell you what, in the fab shop, stuff that we're using every single day: shear, brake, vertical bandsaw, horizontal bandsaw. And then we've got a T-post dolly setup with, there's got to be 40 different dollies that we've built and made out of. There's one that's a bowling ball on the end of a rod that it's got a holder, and so you've got this big round surface that you can form metal over. But that gets used constantly. And then the things that don't get used as much but still are used on every single build, just maybe not every day: English wheel, plenishing hammer. We've got a pull max, a shrinker stretcher. All those things get used a lot for sure, are used on every build significantly. But your day to day, I mean, every day you're running you're on the brake, probably the plenishing hammer, shrinker stretcher if you're doing any fabrication, because that's how you're going to make fender lips and inner fenders and all these different things that we're doing. And then for us, because we're making so many of these custom parts that then go into production later, we've got a mill and a lathe, so we'll make these parts manually, one off, and then once it's working and we like it, then we can 3D scan it, and the guys in the machine shop will then take it and
reverse engineer that and turn it into an actual part, CNC machine part.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll do the prototyping a lot of times on our side. Sometimes on theirs, just depends on the part and how complicated it is. Frankly, if it's something we can whip out on the manual Bridgeport, then we're just going to do that and just keep moving on with our day. But I think the real satisfaction comes from using the hammer and dolly a lot of times, where you're just that's the old school traditional way of forming metal, right? And getting this part and the material to move how you want it to, and to end up fitting is really a neat feeling. And then along with that is the English wheel and the plenishing hammer, to be able to take a flat piece of metal and spend an afternoon and come up with something that resembles a functioning part is a pretty great feeling.
Would I be? I'm really on the edge of my own personal knowledge here, so excuse this if it comes across as a stupid question. When you're sort of getting more into the English wheel and actually shaping bodywork, I would, in my own mind, separate that. Obviously, it's a form of fabrication, but I would sort of separate that from mainstream fabrication. It's almost what I would refer to as coach building, quite a different set of skills to, TIG welding, MIG welding, cutting steel, etc.
Right. Yeah.
Is that becoming a bit of a lost art as well?
Oh, it really is, and it's really impressive. There's some guys out there that, they're building they have the bucks for these, antique Jaguars and some of these cars that are just amazing. And they're building these full bodies in aluminum. They're doing all with English wheel. And, there's only a select few, you talked about becoming a master at your craft or an expert. There's definitely only a handful of people that are able to coach build, an entire car. And there's just some incredibly talented people out there. Our usage is a lot more limited, right? We're building door skins or a roof panel or something. But and that in itself is a lost art for sure, especially with with carbon fiber and fiberglass and these different technologies where you don't necessarily always have to make the part from scratch. But for sure, the guys that are coach building, the ones that are building these car bodies from absolute scratch is it's a lost art, and there's only a few people left doing it. And I'm really excited when I see on Instagram and some of the other sites, YouTube and stuff, where these guys are holding classes and teaching the next generation of people these skills. It's really important.
It would be a shame if that skill set died out completely, which I suspect it could well be in danger of in the next few generations. In that respect, is that another sort of argument for more use of composites? Because, as you say, it's just easier to do off a 3D CAD model.
Right. So, cost is always going to be a factor, and time, right? So a lot of times with these coach built projects, I mean, it's years and years and years versus being able to, again, as we talk about, being able to simultaneously have that being designed while something else is being physically built in the fab shop, and then then that part shows up. Many hands went into constructing it, but as far as what's going on at the actual car, that wasn't distracted or detracted from that build at all. And then all of a sudden, here's this door panel or a quarter panel or a roof skin or whatever the case may be in carbon, where you don't have that luxury in doing it in metal, right? It's going to probably take longer and it's going to disrupt the build. So there's, an argument for both. And I think that it's important that we use and continue to use both as a mix, right? Not too heavily with the composites fully, because you still need all that substructure and to being able to do these things as you progress through the build, and then bring the carbon fiber components into it, even if it's the entire car in carbon, which is excellent. All the substructure that needs to be done underneath, it's important that those skills are maintained so that that's able to be done.
Yeah. It's not like you're bonding these carbon fiber panels onto a carbon fiber monocoque. It's still steel underneath.
Right. Exactly.
All right, Ryan, I think we'll respect your time here and we'll move towards wrapping this up. It's been an incredibly interesting chat, and I'm sure we could go on for another hour, but I know we're sort of getting on towards 2 now, so we'll let you get out of here. We've got the same 3 questions we ask all of our guests, and the first of those is, what's next in the future for you and Ring Brothers?
Well, I tell you what, it's exciting for myself. Just advancement in my craft in building cars. That's always the goal, is to push myself, and I get excited thinking about not just the build that we're wrapping up right now, but the next one after that, and the ones that I don't even know exist yet. Right?
You just never know what's around the next corner.
Right, and the thing that always that excites all of us here at Ring Brothers is the idea that we could get involved with something that we haven't even given a thought to yet. Something that's new and unique is exciting. Just like with this Aston Martin, when that came about, that wasn't a thought to any of us up until that project came about. So the idea that more of those are down the road is really exciting. And for me personally, just being able to be a part of these builds as they progress, and to see what technology is allowing us to do in these builds is just so exciting. Even from when I started till now, just how far this industry has come is really exciting. To think about where it'll be and where Ring Brothers will be in 20 or 30 years from now is really inspiring and exciting to think about. So, we want to keep this company going. We want to keep building these cars and pushing the limits of technology and ourselves. And to think about what that will look like 2 decades from now, it's really exciting. And I know all of us are thrilled to see where the future takes this industry, right? Because how much it's grown and advanced in, say, the last 20 years, just imagine the next, and what that's going to look like is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I can just hear the passion in your voice as you're talking about that. You're absolutely right, though, the technology that's developed. And I mean, right now, with what we have available to us, everything we've talked about, it's hard to see what more we could need. But of course, 30 years ago, no one was thinking, oh, well, if only I had a 3D scanner and a CNC machine, what more I could do. And I guess we're in exactly that same situation right now. So we don't know what we don't know. Let's see what the future holds. Next question, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster?
Well, I tell you what, if I had it to do over again, I would absolutely have done everything I did, because let me back up. I'm a firm believer that every step we take throughout our lives molds and shapes us to end up where we are, right? And it's what you do with that information that is important, and to use that every day as a foundation for doing more exciting, better things and pushing yourself, right? So you need that knowledge. So I wouldn't change anything. However, the advice I would give a younger version of myself, or someone like myself, is to just show up at one of these shops, be asked to put to work. Don't ask for a paycheck. Just beg, plead. If this is what you want to do, beg, plead for a job that pays nothing other than an experience and knowledge. right? Grab a broom, ask if you can come by for an hour at the end of the day and help clean up whatever it is, and just do it, just be there and show that dedication and that passion, and just learn by watching. You'll be miles ahead because you'll be able to see how this industry works. You'll be able to see what the interactions within the shop looks like, and eventually you'll be a part of these things, and you'll get a real sense for what goes into these builds and what these people that work on these cars are like. And if that's something that you're truly interested in, you've got a foot in the door of knowing kind of how that world looks.
Great advice. A couple of points I want to dig into in a little bit more detail there. I think that just turning up and grabbing a broom and helping clean up, that is such an effective foot in the door. And I think, unfortunately, these days, that sort of work ethic is maybe not as common as it used to be. I don't know what that says about the current generation. Hopefully I'm off the mark there. But yeah, I think that just shows that work ethic. A lot of people, I think, who are younger, I get this question around EFI tuning all the time, like, how do I become a tuner? And my usual answer pretty much goes along the same lines as that. Find a dyno shop, go and offer to clean the dyno cell, and build your relationship with the owner and see what comes of that. No one starts by jumping on the dyno their first day. You've got to build up to that. The other point you made there is about all of the elements of your life journey sort of being important in some way, shape or form, and forming who you've become. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I did a 4-year Bachelor of Technology degree, which on face value, I use absolutely none of it today. And I look back on that, or was that a waste of 4 years of my life? And I hate to think how much money, but the reality is it wasn't. And the big takeaway I got from that degree, which is really not central to the degree, is in my last year, every week we had to do an off-the-cuff impromptu presentation to a class of about 50 people. And over the course of that year, I got real comfortable real quick with public speaking, which is now something I leverage pretty heavily with what I do for HPA. So was it all a waste? No, I don't actually think it was. But sometimes on face value, these decisions you make, the path you go down, might not seem to necessarily add to what you're doing. But there's almost always going to be some subtle takeaway, I think.
Absolutely.
All right, last question for today, Ryan. If people want to follow you and Ring Brothers, how are they best to do so? What are the websites, social media accounts, etc.?
Yeah, so Ring Brothers, ringbrothers.com is the website. Real easy. Same with Facebook and Instagram. Just look up Ring Brothers. Myself, Fab Guy Ryan. So it's FABGUI_Ryan. And you'll find me there on Instagram. But, tell you what, go to ringbrothers.com or search Ring Brothers on Instagram, and you'll be able to find all the information you could ever want. You'll be able to get the shop number. And at the end of the day, if you have any questions, any concerns, or have anything that you need for your build, just give us a call. Hunter will be happy to answer any questions you have about our product line. And if there's anything that I can do to help with somebody that's looking to get into this field or has any questions directly related to something we talked about here on the podcast, just shoot me a message on Instagram. Be happy to talk to anybody.
Perfect. And as always, we'll put links to those accounts and the website in the show notes to make it easy for people to find. Look, Ryan, been great to get some insight behind some of these amazing builds that I've been seeing pretty much every year I've gone to SEMA. Great to also learn about your background, and hopefully there's been some good little tips, hints and takeaways in here for the enthusiasts who are wanting to improve their fab game or maybe get started. So thank you again for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tuned In with Ryan, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Clarky X from Australia, who said, "I'm an old dog learning new tricks. I didn't have the funds to prioritise a multi-car garage when younger, but now with a bit more disposable income, I am able to at least have one project car to learn on. I'm so glad that HPA popped up on my social. The podcast alone is gold, and with the discount vouchers, it's a great gateway into sampling the courses incrementally. I've already purchased a couple, and I'm looking forward to putting the knowledge to good use to improve my street machine for road and track use." Oh, great to hear, Clarky. Great to hear that you're finding the podcast useful and, of course, getting into our courses. So good luck with the project car build in your garage. And if you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.